In the Victorian house on Elm Street, a humanitarian worker returning from overseas was about to discover her family home had been stolen. What started as a grief-stricken homecoming took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her sister's betrayal. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical grieving granddaughter. For 10 years, she had built schools in developing countries, known for her crisis management skills. When she encountered Claire's ultimatum, "Pack your bags, this house is mine now," she had no idea she was walking into orchestrated fraud. Sarah's response would lead to a legal reckoning exposing years of deception. What began as a funeral visit would become a battle for justice that would forever change Millbrook. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rental car's engine ticked as it cooled in the October air, but Sarah Mitchell remained behind the wheel, staring at the Victorian house that had shaped her childhood. 10 years. 10 years since she'd walked through that front door, and now she was back for the one reason she'd hoped would never come. Grandmother Rose was gone. The house looked smaller than memory had painted it, though the wraparound porch still commanded respect on Elm Street. The maple trees that had once towered over her 7-year-old head now seemed manageable, their red and gold leaves scattered across the lawn in patterns that spoke of autumn's inevitable march. But something felt wrong the moment she'd turned into the driveway. The garden beds were different, modern plantings where grandmother's prized roses had bloomed. The porch swing hung from new chains. Sarah's phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Another message from the field office in Guatemala, asking about project timelines. She'd been in the middle of coordinating a school construction when Robert Thompson's call had reached her 3 days ago. The family lawyer's voice had been careful, measured, as he delivered news that had sent her world tilting off its axis. "Your grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep. The funeral is Saturday." She'd caught the first flight out of Guatemala City, her humanitarian work grinding to a halt as grief and duty pulled her back across the years to this place she'd tried so hard to leave behind. The front door opened before she could gather the strength to approach it. Claire stepped onto the porch with a confidence that made Sarah's breath catch. Her younger sister had always been beautiful, the kind of effortless grace that had made high school easier for her and harder for everyone else. But this was different. Claire moved across the porch like she owned it. Because, Sarah realized with growing unease, that's exactly how she was acting. "Sarah," Claire's voice carried across the yard, warm but somehow territorial. "I was wondering when you'd finally show up." The words stung more than they should have. Sarah had been traveling for 36 hours straight, navigating flight delays and grief in equal measure. But Claire's tone suggested she was late for an appointment rather than arriving for their grandmother's funeral. Sarah climbed out of the car, her legs unsteady from exhaustion and jet lag. The cool New England air bit through her lightweight jacket. She'd packed for Guatemala's climate, not October in Massachusetts. "Claire, I came as soon as I could." Her sister descended the porch steps with measured grace, and Sarah noticed she was wearing one of grandmother's necklaces, the silver locket that had been a family heirloom for 3 generations. Sarah's mother had worn it. Grandmother had promised it would pass to the eldest granddaughter. "The funeral's at 11, Claire said, approaching with arms extended for what appeared to be a welcoming embrace. But as she drew closer, her voice dropped to a whisper that only Sarah could hear. "We need to talk before then. About the arrangements, about everything." The hug felt performative, like Claire was aware of watching eyes from neighboring houses. Mrs. Jameson's curtains twitched next door. Some things never changed in Millbrook. But when Claire pulled back, her smile held something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, maybe. Or possession. "You must be exhausted," Claire continued at normal volume. "Come inside. I've got everything ready." The emphasis on "I" wasn't lost on Sarah, but she followed her sister up the familiar porch steps. The front door's brass handle was warm from the morning sun, worn smooth by decades of family hands. Sarah had expected the touch to feel like coming home. Instead, it felt like visiting a museum of someone else's life. The entryway had been repainted, soft gray where cream walls had welcomed visitors for 40 years. The antique hall table was gone, replaced by something modern and sleek. In its place sat a stack of mail addressed to Claire Mitchell, the return addresses showing local businesses and utility companies. Sarah's training in crisis management, honed through years of navigating complex situations in developing countries, kicked in. She began cataloging details with the same methodical approach she used when assessing village needs or resource allocation. The mail. The confident way Claire moved through the space. The casual assumption of authority. "Coffee?" Claire asked, leading the way toward the kitchen. "I know you probably need it after that trip." "That would be good." Sarah's voice sounded foreign to her own ears, carefully neutral in a way that felt familiar from diplomatic negotiations. "Thank you." The kitchen had been Claire's domain even as a teenager. She'd always been the one to charm grandmother into baking sessions and late-night snacks. But now it felt like more than familiarity. Claire moved through the space with the unconscious grace of someone who belonged there, who'd been belonging there for… How long? "How long have you been staying here?" Sarah asked, accepting the coffee mug, one of grandmother's good china cups, the kind she'd only brought out for special occasions. Claire's hand paused imperceptibly as she poured her own cup. "Since Grandma got sick, someone needed to take care of her." The implied criticism landed like a physical blow. Sarah had sent money. She'd called every week, sometimes twice. She'd arranged for a local service to check on grandmother when her letters had started arriving less frequently. But she hadn't come home. "I didn't know she was that sick." Sarah's voice carried 10 years of guilt she'd thought she'd worked through in therapy. "Robert said it was peaceful, that she wasn't suffering." "Peaceful, yes." Claire's tone held layers Sarah couldn't parse. "She talked about you, you know. Toward the end. Wondered if you'd ever come back." The coffee turned bitter in Sarah's mouth. "Claire, the townspeople have been amazing," Claire continued, as if Sarah hadn't spoken. "Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store, the Hendersons, even old Mr. Walsh from the hardware store. They all understood that family means being here when it matters." Each word was a carefully placed blade, finding the soft spots in Sarah's armor with surgical precision. Claire had always been gifted at knowing exactly what to say to cause maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. But this felt different. More calculated. More certain. A knock at the front door interrupted the tension. Claire moved to answer it with the easy confidence of someone expecting visitors, and Sarah heard voices in the hallway. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store, speaking in the hushed tones reserved for funeral preparations. "Oh, Claire dear, I brought the flowers you ordered. And the ladies from the church auxiliary wanted me to tell you they'll have everything set up at the parish hall by 10:30. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Patterson. I don't know what I'd have done without all your help these past months." Months. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down too quickly. Claire had been living here for months, long enough to establish relationships with local vendors, long enough to plan their grandmother's funeral with the easy familiarity of family. "Is that Sarah?" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried genuine warmth. "Oh, honey, we're so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was so proud of the work you're doing overseas, building schools for those poor children." Sarah managed appropriate responses, but her mind was racing. The conversation felt choreographed, like Claire had prepared the townspeople for this moment. Mrs. Patterson's comments about Sarah's work felt secondhand, as if she'd learned about it from Claire rather than from grandmother directly. After Mrs. Patterson left, the sisters returned to the kitchen in silence. Claire resumed her coffee as if nothing had happened, but Sarah could feel her watching, gauging reactions. "The funeral arrangements," Sarah began carefully. "I'd like to help with… Everything's handled." Claire's voice was pleasant but final. "I've been taking care of it all. The service, the reception, the flowers. Grandma and I discussed what she wanted." Another blade, this one striking deeper. "Grandmother and I." The implication was clear. While Sarah had been building schools in Guatemala, Claire had been here, sharing intimate conversations about final wishes, being the granddaughter who mattered when it counted. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Robert Thompson. "Looking forward to seeing you after the service." We have much to discuss." The message felt like a lifeline. At least someone in this town remembered she existed before yesterday. But when she looked up from her phone, Claire was watching her with an expression that made Sarah's chest tighten. "Work calling?" Claire's tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "I know how important your projects are, more important than family, apparently." "That's not fair." The words came out harder than Sarah intended. "I've been sending money. Money." Claire laughed, but the sound held no humor. "You think money solves everything, don't you? Just like when we were kids. You thought you could leave for college and mail home your guilt, and somehow that would make up for abandoning the people who needed you." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of grandmother's old clock on the wall. Sarah recognized the fighting stance. Claire's chin lifted slightly, her shoulders set in a way that meant she was ready for battle. It was the same posture she'd adopted at 16, when their parents had caught her sneaking out, at 19, when she'd dropped out of college, at 22, when she'd moved back home after her engagement fell apart. But there was something new underneath the familiar defiance, a certainty that felt dangerous. "Claire," Sarah said carefully, "I know you're grieving. We both are. But we need to..." "Need to what?" Claire set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Need to pretend you have a say in what happens here? Need to act like you understand what Grandma wanted when you haven't stepped foot in this house in 10 years? The words hung between them like a challenge. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the same sensation she'd experienced during earthquakes in Guatemala, the sudden understanding that everything solid could become unstable without warning. Through the kitchen window, she could see neighbors arriving at the house across the street, dressed in funeral black. The service was in 2 hours. Soon they'd be standing together beside their grandmother's casket, presenting a united front to the community that had watched them grow up. But sitting in this kitchen, looking at her sister's face, Sarah realized she had no idea who Claire had become in the years since she'd left. And more unsettling still, she was beginning to suspect that Claire knew exactly who she wanted to be. The clock ticked toward 10, marking time until a funeral that would change everything. But as Sarah studied her sister's face, beautiful, confident, and somehow stranger, she wondered if the changes had already begun long before she'd gotten on that plane from Guatemala City. Whatever was happening here, whatever had shifted in the months when grandmother was sick and Sarah was building schools on the other side of the world, she was about to find out. Whether she was ready or not. The clock on grandmother's mantel chimed 8 times, its familiar brass voice echoing through the house that no longer felt like home. Sarah had barely slept, her body clock still anchored somewhere over the Atlantic while her mind churned through the previous day's revelations. The funeral had been a masterclass in Claire's performance art. Every tear perfectly timed, every embrace with townspeople calculated to reinforce her position as the devoted granddaughter who had stayed. Now, in the gray light of early morning, Sarah stood in the hallway outside what had been their grandmother's study, testing the door handle for the 3rd time. Locked. The brass plate where a key had always hung sat empty, leaving only a small rectangular shadow on the wallpaper. "Looking for something?" Claire's voice carried from the kitchen, bright with the false cheer of someone who'd been awake for hours, preparing. Sarah turned to find her sister standing in the doorway, perfectly put together despite the early hour. She wore one of grandmother's cardigans, cashmere, cream-colored, expensive. Another small theft disguised as sentiment. "I need to see grandmother's papers," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "The will, insurance documents, anything related to the estate." Claire's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Everything's been taken care of. I told you yesterday. I've been handling all of this. I'm sure you have." Sarah's diplomatic training served her well, each word carefully chosen. "But as grandmother's other heir, I need to review the documentation." "Other heir?" Claire's laugh was like breaking glass. "Sarah, I think jet lag is affecting your thinking. You've been gone for 10 years. 10 years. Do you really think grandmother would leave her house to someone who couldn't be bothered to visit? The words hit their target with surgical precision. But Sarah had spent a decade navigating hostile negotiations in villages, where water rights could mean the difference between life and death. She recognized manipulation when she saw it. "The house has been in our family for 4 generations," Sarah said quietly. "Grandmother always said it would stay in the family. And it is staying in the family." Claire moved closer, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd used as a child when she wanted something. "I'm family, Sarah. I'm the family that was here when it mattered." Sarah noticed the pronoun shift. Not "we're family," "I'm family." The distinction felt deliberate, practiced. "Where are the documents, Claire?" "Safe." Claire's smile brightened again, but her eyes remained calculating. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." Sarah had learned to read between lines in 3 languages, to navigate bureaucracies that operated on bribes and favors, to spot the gaps between what people said and what they meant. Claire's responses had the practiced feel of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "I'd like to see them. And I'd like a lot of things." Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "I'd like a sister who came home for Christmas. I'd like a sister who was here when grandmother fell and broke her hip. I'd like a sister who didn't treat this family like a charity case that could be managed with wire transfers and guilt checks." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Sarah felt the familiar weight of guilt she'd carried for a decade, the price of choosing a life of service over family obligation. But underneath the guilt, her analytical mind was cataloging inconsistencies. Grandmother had never mentioned falling. Her letters had never mentioned Claire living in the house full-time. "When did grandmother fall?" Sarah asked. Claire's pause was microscopic, but Sarah caught it. "Last winter. February. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I never got a call. I handled it." Claire's tone suggested this should be obvious. "Like I handled everything else while you were off saving the world." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through months of emails and call logs. She'd spoken to grandmother every Sunday, religiously. Grandmother had never mentioned a fall, never mentioned being in the hospital. Her voice had been strong, clear, right up until the calls had started coming less frequently in the past few months. "Show me the hospital records," Sarah said. Claire's smile flickered. "Excuse me?" "If grandmother was hospitalized for 2 weeks, there would be records. Bills. Insurance claims." "Show me." "Sarah!" Claire's voice took on the patient tone she'd used when they were children, and she was explaining why Sarah's toys had mysteriously broken. "You're being paranoid. Grief does that sometimes." But Sarah was no longer the older sister who could be manipulated by Claire's wounded act. She was a woman who'd learned to spot deception across cultural and language barriers, who'd negotiated with warlords and bureaucrats, who'd seen what people were capable of when they wanted something badly enough. "I'm going to call Robert Thompson," Sarah said. The change in Claire's expression was instant. A brief flash of something that looked like panic before the mask snapped back into place. "Robert's retired. Has been for months." Another lie. Sarah had received a text from Robert just yesterday, asking to meet after the funeral. She'd postponed their meeting, overwhelmed by grief and the strange dynamics with Claire, but now she wondered if that had been a mistake. "Claire, what's going on here?" "What's going on," Claire said, her voice hardening, "is that I've been taking care of everything while you've been playing humanitarian hero. What's going on is that I've been the daughter grandmother could count on. And what does that mean, exactly?" Claire walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden she'd redesigned without permission. When she turned back, her expression had shifted into something Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of satisfaction and cruelty that made her stomach clench. "It means that 3 months ago, grandmother and I had a very important conversation about the future of this house. It means that she understood who really cared about preserving the family legacy. Show me the papers." "I don't have to show you anything." Claire's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "This is my house now, Sarah. Grandmother signed it over to me before she died. Legal and binding." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Not the metaphorical instability of yesterday, but something more concrete. A growing certainty that whatever Claire had done, whatever papers she claimed to have, something was fundamentally wrong. "That's impossible," Sarah said. Grandmother would never what? Leave her house to the granddaughter who actually loved her enough to stay? The granddaughter who didn't abandon her family the moment she turned 18? Claire moved closer, and Sarah caught a whiff of expensive perfume. Not Claire's usual drugstore brands, but something that cost more than most people's car payments. The kind of perfume that suggested access to money Claire shouldn't have had. The granddaughter who was here when she needed someone, not halfway around the world building schools for strangers while her own family fell apart? Claire. No. Claire's voice cut through Sarah's attempt to respond. You don't get to Claire me. You don't get to come back here after 10 years and act like you have any claim to this place. You made your choice a long time ago. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Robert Thompson. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk immediately. It's about your grandmother's estate. Claire's eyes flicked to the phone, and Sarah saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Popular today, Claire said, but her tone had lost some of its confidence. Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her. The expensive clothes. The confident posture. The way she moved through grandmother's house like she owned it. The mail addressed to her. The casual references to conversations with grandmother that Sarah had never heard about. Pack your bags, Claire said suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. This house is mine now. The words hit Sarah like ice water. There was no mistaking the threat, no room for misinterpretation. Claire wasn't just claiming the house, she was evicting her. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Claire's smile was razor sharp. I've been more than patient, letting you stay here last night. But this is my home now, and you're not welcome. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not grief, not shock, but a cold, analytical fury that had served her well in crisis situations. She looked at her sister and saw not family, but an adversary who had calculated every move, planned every word. And if I refuse? Claire's laugh was genuine this time, but it held no warmth. Then, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. The threat hung between them like a weapon. Sarah realized that everything about the past 24 hours had been leading to this moment. Claire's territorial behavior, the changed locks, the casual assumption of authority. This wasn't grief or family dynamics. This was a hostile takeover. You have until this afternoon, Claire continued, her voice now businesslike. I have people coming to look at some of grandmother's furniture, potential buyers. They won't want to be disturbed by family drama. Buyers. Sarah's analytical mind clicked into overdrive. You're selling grandmother's things? I'm managing the estate, as is my right. Grandmother's china collection. The antique secretary in the living room. Mother's jewelry. Sarah's voice was barely controlled. You're selling everything. I'm making practical decisions about valuable assets. Something you'd understand if you'd ever bothered to stick around long enough to learn what responsibility looks like. Sarah looked around the kitchen, grandmother's kitchen, and saw it through new eyes. The absence of certain pieces she remembered. Empty spaces on shelves where treasured items had once sat. Even the good coffee cups they'd been drinking from yesterday. Were those the only ones left? Her phone buzzed again. Robert Thompson. Sarah, this is urgent. Please call immediately. Claire noticed the phone, and for the first time since Sarah had arrived, her confidence flickered. You should probably get that, she said, but her tone suggested the opposite. Though I imagine you'll find that legal matters are already settled. Sarah looked at her sister one more time, memorizing the expression on her face. The satisfaction, the cruelty, the certainty that she'd won. Then she turned and walked toward the front door. Smart choice, Claire called after her. And Sarah? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've spent 10 years proving that you don't really care about this family. Don't start pretending now. Sarah paused in the doorway, her hand on the brass handle that had welcomed her home just 24 hours ago. When she turned back, Claire was standing in the kitchen doorway, backlit by morning sun, looking every inch the victorious younger sister who'd finally gotten everything she'd ever wanted. "Goodbye, Claire," Sarah said quietly, but as she walked to her rental car, Sarah's mind was already moving past grief and shock to something more familiar: strategic planning. She'd spent 10 years solving problems that seemed impossible, working within systems designed to frustrate progress, finding ways to build hope in hopeless situations. Whatever Claire had done, whatever papers she thought she had, whatever game she thought she was playing, she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her sister. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Robert Thompson's number. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. Robert Thompson's law office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same mahogany desk, the same leather-bound volumes lining the walls, the same smell of old paper and furniture polish. But the man behind the desk looked older, more tired, as if the weight of family secrets had aged him beyond his 65 years. "I've been expecting this call for months," he said, gesturing for Sarah to sit. His voice carried the careful tone of someone who'd been preparing for a difficult conversation. Sarah remained standing, too wired from caffeine and adrenaline to settle. "Claire says she owns the house. That grandmother signed it over to her." Robert's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the desk's surface. "Claire has been creative with her interpretation of recent events." "What does that mean?" "It means," Robert said, opening a thick file folder, "that your grandmother updated her will 3 years ago. You, Sarah, are the sole heir to the house and property." The words hit her like a physical blow. Relief and confusion warred in her chest. "Then how?" "Your sister presented what appeared to be a quitclaim deed 6 months ago, claiming your grandmother had transferred ownership to her." Robert's voice hardened. The signatures were forged. Expertly done, but forged nonetheless. Sarah sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "You knew?" "I suspected. But your grandmother specifically instructed me to wait for your return before taking any action. She was concerned about Claire's behavior in her final months." Robert pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. "Your grandmother was sharper than Claire realized. She documented everything. Claire's increasing demands for money, her suggestions about changing the will, her attempts to isolate your grandmother from neighbors and friends." Sarah's mind reeled. Mrs. Jameson mentioned documenting things. Dorothy Jameson has been invaluable. Photography, dates, times when Claire brought strangers to the house. Antique dealers, we suspect. She even recorded some conversations from her garden. The scope of Claire's deception was staggering. "How long has this been going on?" "Actively?" "About 8 months. But the planning—" Robert hesitated. "Sarah, your grandmother developed early-stage dementia last year. Nothing severe, but enough to make her vulnerable to manipulation. Claire exploited that vulnerability." Sarah's anger crystallized into something cold and precise. "What are our options?" Robert smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "We've already prepared eviction papers and fraud charges. I was waiting for your permission to proceed." "And Claire has no idea?" "None whatsoever. She's been operating under the assumption that possession equals ownership, and that you'd be too grief-stricken or too guilty to fight her." Sarah thought about Claire's confidence that morning, her casual cruelty, her assumption of victory. "How quickly can we move?" "The papers can be served this afternoon." Robert's smile widened. "I took the liberty of having them prepared yesterday after your text. Sometimes the best counterattack is the one your opponent never sees coming." Sarah looked out the window toward Elm Street, where Claire was probably already meeting with potential buyers for their grandmother's treasures. "Do it." "There's one more thing," Robert added quietly. "Your grandmother left you a letter. She wanted you to read it before making any decisions about Claire's future." He handed her a sealed envelope, her name written in grandmother's careful script. Sarah held it for a moment, feeling the weight of final words. then tucked it into her jacket. "Let's go serve some papers," she said. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the Victorian house at 7:42 a.m., followed by Claire's scream of rage. Sarah heard it from the diner across town, where she'd been nursing coffee and waiting for Robert's text. "Papers delivered." She's not taking it well. By the time Sarah reached Elm Street, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Jameson stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching the drama unfold with the satisfaction of someone whose patience had finally been vindicated. Through the front window, Sarah could see Claire pacing frantically, phone pressed to her ear. The process server's car was pulling away, his job done. "Jessica's on her way," Mrs. Jameson called out, saw her speeding down Main Street like the devil was chasing her. Inside the house, Claire's voice rose to a shriek. "This is impossible. Sarah doesn't have any legal standing. She abandoned this family." But the legal documents told a different story. Fraud charges, forgery, elder abuse. The words that would destroy not just Claire's plans, but her future. Jessica's Honda Civic screeched into the driveway. Sarah watched her sister's best friend run toward the house, her paralegal training evident in the way she clutched her briefcase. This was the moment that would test loyalties and reveal true character. "Claire!" Jessica's voice carried through the open door. "What did you do?" The question hung in the morning air like an accusation. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the house she'd inherited. The house Claire had tried to steal. The house that would now become the stage for the final act of their family's drama. Through the window, she could see Claire's face, no longer confident, no longer in control, just scared, cornered, and facing the consequences of her elaborate deception. The reckoning had begun. The bell above Murphy's diner hadn't stopped chiming since 8 a.m. Sarah sat in the corner booth, watching through the front window as the small drama on Elm Street unfolded, while the real theater played out in hushed conversations around her. Millbrook had always thrived on gossip, but this morning's events had elevated mere rumor to the level of epic scandal. "I always knew that Claire girl was trouble," Martha Henderson whispered to her companion at the counter, her voice carrying just enough to ensure half the diner could hear. Pretty as a picture, but you could see the scheming in her eyes. "Now, Martha, that's not fair," replied Tom Walsh from the hardware store, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. "The girl was taking care of her grandmother. That counts for something." Sarah kept her eyes on her untouched eggs, listening to her life being dissected by people who'd known her since she could barely see over the counter. The strange thing was how quickly the town had divided into camps, Team Sarah versus Team Claire, as if this were some kind of sporting event rather than a family destroying itself in real time. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Michael Davis. I'm at the airport. Should I still come?" Michael. She'd forgotten he was supposed to arrive today, flying in from their last humanitarian project to provide moral support during what was supposed to be a simple estate settlement. Now she was about to drag him into a legal battle that would probably end with her sister in jail. She typed back, "Yes, but things have gotten complicated." Complicated how? "Long story. I'll explain when you get here." Through the window, she could see Mrs. Jameson gesturing animatedly to a small crowd of neighbors, her arms moving in the precise way that meant she was delivering testimony rather than gossip. Dorothy Jameson had waited 40 years for a moment like this, when her careful observation and documentation would matter to someone who could do something about it. "Sarah Mitchell?" She looked up to find Betty Chen, the town's longtime newspaper editor, standing beside her booth with a notepad and the expression of someone who smelled a story worth telling. "I don't think now is a good time," Sarah said carefully. "I understand this is difficult," Betty said, sliding uninvited into the opposite seat. "But people are talking. The whole town knows something serious is happening on Elm Street. Wouldn't you rather they heard the truth from you?" Sarah considered this. In Guatemala, she'd learned that controlling the narrative could be as important as controlling the facts. Public opinion could make the difference between a project's success and failure, between a community embracing change or resisting it. What are people saying? Betty's pen hovered over her notepad. Mixed things. Some folks are saying Claire was a devoted granddaughter who earned the right to inherit. Others are saying. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Others are saying Dorothy Jameson has been documenting some questionable activities. What kind of activities? Strange men coming and going. Antique dealers, maybe. Claire loading furniture into trucks when your grandmother was supposedly at doctor's appointments. Betty leaned forward. People noticed, Sarah. In a town this size, everything gets noticed eventually. Sarah thought about Mrs. Jameson's detailed observations, Robert's carefully prepared legal documents, and Claire's confident assumption that no one had been paying attention. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "When my grandmother got sick, did Claire ever mention anything about falls, hospital stays, serious medical issues?" Betty's expression shifted. "Your grandmother was never hospitalized, Sarah. I would have known. I write the hospital beat for the paper, and I saw her at the grocery store just 3 weeks before she passed. She was moving slowly, but she was sharp as ever." Another lie exposed. Sarah wondered how many more there were, how deep Claire's deception ran. "There's something else," Betty continued. "Claire applied for a business license last month. Something about an estate sales company. People thought it was odd timing, given your grandmother's condition." The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle Sarah hadn't known she was solving. The missing furniture, the antique dealers, Claire's expensive clothes and confident manner. She hadn't just been planning to steal the house, she'd been systematically liquidating everything valuable inside it. "I need to go," Sarah said, standing abruptly. "Sarah, wait." Betty's voice stopped her. "For what it's worth, most people remember you as a good kid who wanted to help people. That matters to folks around here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The kindness in her voice was unexpected, and Sarah felt tears threaten for the first time since she'd arrived in Millbrook. She nodded her thanks and headed for the door, but not before hearing Martha Henderson's voice rise again from the counter. "I always said that Sarah girl had backbone. Takes guts to leave everything you know to go build schools for strangers. Takes even more guts to come home and fight for what's right." Outside, the October air carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. The crowd on Elm Street had grown, and Sarah could see Claire's silhouette pacing frantically behind the living room curtains. Jessica's car was still in the driveway, but from the raised voices echoing through the windows, the conversation inside wasn't going well. Sarah's phone rang. "Robert Thompson. Sarah, we need to talk. Claire just called my office claiming you've somehow manipulated evidence. She's threatening to file countercharges." "Can she do that?" "She can try. But Sarah, there's something else. I just got off the phone with the bank. Your grandmother's savings account, the one Claire had been managing, it's been almost completely drained. We're talking about $60,000 in suspicious withdrawals over the past 6 months. $60,000. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of Claire's betrayal settle over her like a physical thing. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about systematic theft from a vulnerable elderly woman, exploitation that went far beyond forged documents and changed locks. "There's more," Robert continued. 3 antique shops in town have purchased items they now realize belonged to your grandmother. Claire sold them family heirlooms worth thousands of dollars. Sarah looked at the house where she'd grown up, where her grandmother had lived for 60 years, where Claire had systematically stolen everything that mattered. The silver locket Claire had been wearing at the funeral, had that been sold too, or was she saving it as a trophy? A black SUV pulled into the driveway behind Jessica's Honda. Sarah didn't recognize the vehicle, but from the way Claire's pacing stopped abruptly, she had a feeling this was about to get worse. "Robert," Sarah said, "I think you should get over here. Claire just got company, and something tells me she's about to make another very bad decision." Through the living room window, Sarah could see Claire gesturing frantically to whoever had just arrived. The conversation looked heated, desperate. And from the way Jessica suddenly appeared in the doorway, looking around frantically before spotting Sarah across the street, it was about to spill over into something none of them were prepared for. The town of Millbrook had always been quiet, predictable, the kind of place where the biggest scandal usually involved the church potluck committee. But as Sarah watched her sister's world unravel in real time, she realized that sometimes the most destructive storms came from the people you'd shared a childhood with, the ones who knew exactly which wounds would hurt the most. Her phone buzzed with another text from Michael. Landed. On my way. Should I be worried? Sarah looked at the growing crowd of neighbors, the frantic activity inside her childhood home, and the black SUV that shouldn't be there. Yes, she typed back. You should definitely be worried. The black SUV belonged to Dr. Patricia Hawkins, Millbrook's only geriatrician. Sarah recognized her the moment she stepped out of the vehicle, tall, silver-haired, with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd spent 40 years delivering difficult news to families. But her presence at grandmother's house raised questions Sarah wasn't sure she wanted answered. Michael's rental car pulled up just as Dr. Hawkins disappeared through the front door. Sarah watched him unfold his 6-foot frame from the compact sedan, his familiar presence an anchor of calm in the chaos surrounding her childhood home. He spotted her immediately, his expression shifting from travel-weary relief to concern as he took in the crowd of neighbors and the tension crackling through the October air. Sarah. His voice carried the same steady warmth that had gotten her through 3 years of humanitarian crises. What exactly have I walked into? The kind of mess that makes village politics look simple, she said, accepting his embrace. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe properly. Through the living room window, they could see Claire gesticulating wildly at Dr. Hawkins while Jessica stood to the side, her paralegal training evident in the way she was taking notes. The scene had the look of a legal consultation rather than a social visit. That's your sister? Michael asked, studying Claire's animated figure. That's Claire. And she's been systematically defrauding our grandmother for months. Michael's eyebrows rose. The same expression he'd worn when they discovered a local official had been skimming funds from their school construction project. How systematic. Forged documents, stolen heirlooms, drained bank accounts, the works. Sarah's phone buzzed with another call from Robert Thompson. Excuse me, I need to take this. Sarah, we have a problem. Robert's voice was tight with concern. Dr. Hawkins just called my office. She wants to discuss your grandmother's medical records with Claire before she'll release them to us. What kind of records? That's what worries me. She mentioned cognitive assessments from your grandmother's final months. If Claire convinced her to document dementia symptoms that didn't exist, Sarah felt cold understanding wash over her. She could claim grandmother wasn't competent to update her will in my favor. Exactly. And if Dr. Hawkins is willing to testify that your grandmother was mentally compromised when she documented Claire's fraudulent behavior, the implications were staggering. Claire hadn't just stolen money and forged documents, she'd been building a comprehensive case to discredit any evidence against her. I'm coming over, Sarah said. Whatever Claire is telling Dr. Hawkins, I want to hear it firsthand. She turned to Michael, who was watching the house with the analytical expression he used when assessing complex logistics problems. I need to get inside that house. Legal advice, probably not a good idea while fraud charges are pending. Practical advice? Michael smiled grimly. Back door? They circled around through Mrs. Jameson's yard, the elderly woman emerging from her kitchen to wave them toward the hedge that separated the properties. Kitchen windows unlocked, she whispered. I saw Claire propping it open earlier, probably for a quick escape route if things go badly. You've been watching closely, Michael observed. 40 years of living next door teaches you to notice when things don't add up, Mrs. Jameson replied. That girl's been planning something for months. Young man comes around at night sometimes, helps her load furniture. Never saw him during the day when Rose was awake. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. Another piece of Claire's operation revealed. The kitchen window was indeed unlocked, and Sarah slipped through with the muscle memory of childhood mischief. The house felt different, emptier somehow, as if Claire had been systematically hollowing it out. The good china cabinet in the dining room was nearly bare. The antique clock from the mantelpiece was gone. Voices carried from the living room, and Sarah crept closer, Michael behind her. "Dr. Hawkins, you have to understand," Claire was saying, her voice carrying the desperate edge of someone fighting for survival. "My grandmother was confused in her final months. She didn't remember signing the documents that transferred the house to me. She would forget our conversations and accuse me of things that never happened." "What kind of accusations?" Dr. Hawkins' voice was professionally neutral. "She claimed I was stealing from her, selling her things. But she would forget where she put items and blame me when she couldn't find them. It was heartbreaking." Sarah gripped Michael's arm. Through the doorway, she could see Claire seated on the sofa, tears streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an Oscar. Jessica sat nearby, her expression troubled. "The cognitive assessment I performed last spring did show some memory issues," Dr. Hawkins said carefully, "but nothing that would indicate severe dementia." "It got worse after that," Claire insisted. "Much worse. She started hiding things, accusing me of conspiracies. Sometimes she didn't recognize me at all." Sarah felt sick. Her weekly phone calls with grandmother had been normal, lucid, right up until they'd become less frequent in the final months. Grandmother's voice had been clear, her mind sharp. There had been no signs of the deterioration Claire was describing. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Hawkins continued, "your grandmother's medical records show no documentation of the severe cognitive decline you're describing. Are you certain these episodes occurred?" "They happened when we were alone," Claire said quickly. "She was always better when other people were around. You know how it is with dementia. Patients can mask symptoms in social situations." "That's not." Jessica's voice cut through Claire's explanation, then stopped abruptly. "Jessica?" Dr. Hawkins prompted. "Nothing. I visited regularly, and Mrs. Mitchell always seemed fine to me." Sarah could see the conflict playing out on Jessica's face. Years of friendship with Claire, warring against her professional knowledge and what she'd witnessed firsthand. "Dr. Hawkins," Claire continued, "surely you can understand why I'm concerned about my sister's sudden interest in the estate. She hasn't been home in 10 years. She doesn't understand how much grandmother changed, how vulnerable she became." "And yet," Dr. Hawkins said slowly, "I have a letter here that your grandmother asked me to give to your sister upon her return. She was quite insistent about it, and her instructions were very clear." Sarah's breath caught. Grandmother's letter, the one Robert had mentioned. "What kind of letter?" Claire's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "The kind written by someone who was very much aware of what was happening in her home," Dr. Hawkins replied. "Someone who wanted to ensure the truth would come out, regardless of what stories might be told after her death." The silence in the living room was deafening. Sarah could see Claire's face go pale, her confident mask finally beginning to crack. "That's impossible," Claire whispered. She was confused. She didn't understand. "Mrs. Mitchell understood perfectly well," Dr. Hawkins said firmly. "She dictated this letter to me because she was concerned about your behavior. She wanted your sister to know exactly what had been happening during her final months." Sarah watched her sister's world collapse in real time. All of Claire's careful planning, her elaborate fraud, her systematic manipulation, undone by an elderly woman who had been far more aware than anyone had given her credit for. "I think," Dr. Hawkins continued, "it's time for the truth to come out, don't you?" The sound that came from Claire's throat wasn't quite a scream, more like the noise a trapped animal makes when it realizes escape is impossible. Sarah watched through the doorway as her sister launched herself from the sofa, lunging toward Dr. Hawkins with a desperation that made Michael tense beside her. "You don't understand," Claire's voice cracked with hysteria. "She was sick. She was confused. That letter doesn't mean anything." Jessica moved quickly, positioning herself between Claire and the doctor, her paralegal training kicking in as she recognized the legal implications of what was unfolding. "Claire, stop. You need to calm down and think about what you're saying." But Claire was beyond rational thought. Sarah could see the exact moment when her sister's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. The confident homeowner, the devoted granddaughter, the wronged younger sister, all of it fell away, leaving behind someone Sarah barely recognized. "She promised me," Claire screamed, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "She promised me this house. She said Sarah had abandoned us, that I was the one who deserved it." "When did she promise you that?" Dr. Hawkins asked quietly, her medical training evident in the way she remained calm despite Claire's breakdown. "Last year when I moved in to take care of her. She was so grateful, so happy to have family close by. She said the house would be mine when—" Claire stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she was admitting. "When what, Claire?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah felt Michael's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the full scope of her sister's manipulation became clear. Claire hadn't just exploited their grandmother's final months. She'd been planning this for over a year, systematically isolating an elderly woman and filling her head with ideas about abandonment and ingratitude. "She was lonely," Claire continued, her voice taking on the wheedling tone Sarah remembered from childhood arguments. "Sarah never called, never visited. I was all she had left. It was only fair that I should inherit." "Your grandmother called Sarah every Sunday," Dr. Hawkins said firmly. "She showed me the phone bills. She was proud of Sarah's work, worried about her safety in Guatemala, but never once suggested that Sarah had abandoned the family." Claire's face went white. "That's not—" She didn't understand what Sarah was really doing. Running away from responsibility, from family obligations. "Stop." Jessica's voice cut through Claire's rambling with surgical precision. "Just stop, Claire. I've heard enough." Sarah watched her sister's best friend, the one person who had remained loyal through years of Claire's impulsive decisions and manipulative behavior, finally reach her breaking point. "You've been lying to me for months," Jessica continued, her paralegal training evident in the way she documented everything with her eyes. "The hospital stay that never happened. The dementia diagnosis that doesn't exist. The legal documents you claimed your grandmother signed willingly." "Jess, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Jessica's voice was cold with professional detachment. "I understand that you've committed elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. I understand that you've been using my legal knowledge to help you plan crimes. And I understand that I have an obligation to report what I've witnessed." The betrayal on Claire's face was almost comical. For someone who had spent months manipulating everyone around her, she seemed genuinely shocked that her actions had consequences. "You can't testify against me," Claire said desperately. "We're friends. You wouldn't." "We were friends," Jessica corrected. "Before I realized what kind of person you really are." That's when Claire snapped completely. Sarah saw it happening and moved without thinking, pushing through the doorway just as Claire lunged toward the antique secretary in the corner, the one piece of furniture she apparently hadn't been able to sell yet. The mahogany cabinet held their grandmother's collection of Hummel figurines, accumulated over 60 years and worth thousands of dollars. "If I can't have this house," Claire screamed, grabbing the nearest figurine, "then nobody gets anything." The porcelain shepherdess shattered against the hardwood floor. Then another. And another. "Claire, stop!" Sarah's voice cut through the destruction, but her sister was beyond hearing. Years of resentment, months of careful planning, and now the complete collapse of her schemes had pushed Claire into a psychological break that was both terrifying and heartbreaking to witness. Michael moved past Sarah, his crisis management experience evident, as he approached Claire with the calm, measured steps of someone used to diffusing volatile situations. "Claire, let's talk about this. Put down the figurine and tell us what you need." "What I need?" Claire laughed, the sound completely unhinged. "I need my sister to have stayed home. I need my parents to have loved me as much as they loved perfect Sarah. I need to matter to someone, anyone, for more than what I can do for them." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Sarah felt her anger crack, revealing the complicated grief underneath. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about a lifetime of feeling second best, of watching her older sister earn praise and admiration while she struggled with every decision. "Claire," Sarah said softly, stepping into the room, "you matter. You've always mattered. Liar." But Claire's voice had lost some of its hysteria. "You left the moment you could. You built schools for strangers while grandmother got older and lonelier. You sent money like that would make up for abandoning your family. I didn't abandon. Yes, you did. Claire hurled another figurine, this one missing Sarah by inches. You left, and you never came back, and you expected everything to stay exactly the same until you decided to grace us with your presence. Dr. Hawkins had moved toward the door, probably to call for medical help, but Sarah held up a hand to stop her. This breakdown had been building for years, maybe decades. Letting it explode completely might be the only way to reach whatever was left of her sister underneath all the manipulation and lies. You're right, Sarah said quietly. I did leave. I did stay away. And maybe if I'd come home more often, none of this would have happened. Claire paused, a Hummel dancer frozen in her raised hand. What? Maybe if I'd been here, you wouldn't have felt like you had to steal grandmother's house to prove you deserved love. The figurine slipped from Claire's fingers, shattering on the floor as her face crumpled completely. All the rage, all the desperate energy that had been driving her, suddenly drained away, leaving behind someone who looked very young and very lost. I just wanted... Claire's voice broke on a sob. I just wanted someone to choose me first. Just once. Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative fraud who had tried to steal their family home, but the insecure little girl who had always felt like she was competing for scraps of attention and approval. The sound of sirens in the distance suggested that someone had called for help, whether medical or legal. In a few minutes, this room would be full of officials and paperwork and the complicated machinery of justice. But for right now, it was just two sisters and the wreckage of their family, finally telling each other the truth. The psychiatric evaluation room at Millbrook General smelled like industrial disinfectant and false hope. Sarah sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, watching Claire sleep under mild sedation, her sister's face finally peaceful for the first time since the funeral. 36 hours had passed since the breakdown, and Sarah felt like she'd aged years in that brief span. Dr. Martinez, the hospital's psychiatrist, closed his file and sat across from Sarah with the careful expression of someone delivering news that would reshape a family's future. Your sister is experiencing what we call an adjustment disorder, with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, complicated by acute stress reaction. The fraud, the lying, the elaborate deception, they're symptoms of someone who's been in psychological crisis for months, possibly years. But she knew what she was doing, Sarah said, struggling to reconcile this clinical assessment with the calculating woman who had tried to steal their grandmother's house. The forged documents, the systematic theft, that wasn't impulsive behavior. No, it wasn't. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Your sister planned extensively, which actually supports the diagnosis. People in severe psychological distress often engage in complex behaviors that seem rational on the surface but serve deeper emotional needs. In Claire's case, stealing the house wasn't really about money or property. What was it about? Belonging, security, proof that she mattered to someone. He paused, studying Sarah's face. She's been carrying feelings of abandonment and inadequacy for years. When your grandmother became her primary source of validation, losing that relationship, through death or discovery of her deception, became an existential threat. Sarah thought about Claire's breakdown, her desperate admission that she just wanted someone to choose her first. So what happens now? That depends partly on you. Dr. Martinez opened another file, this one thicker. The district attorney is prepared to pursue felony fraud charges, which could result in 3 to 5 years in prison. But given your sister's mental state and the family dynamics involved, there may be alternatives. What kind of alternatives? Restorative justice. A plea agreement that includes mandatory therapy, restitution, community service, and supervised rehabilitation instead of incarceration. He studied Sarah carefully, but it would require your support and testimony about her mental state, and it would mean working together to repair the damage she's caused. Sarah looked at Claire's sleeping form, remembering the terrified little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. That girl had grown into a woman capable of exploiting an elderly relative's vulnerability, but the connection between them felt more complex than simple criminality. I need to think about it, of course. But Sarah, Dr. Martinez's voice carried a warning, "Whatever you decide, your sister needs long-term treatment." This breakdown isn't something she can just recover from on her own. Without professional help, this pattern of behavior will likely repeat. After leaving the hospital, Sarah drove to Robert Thompson's office, where Michael was waiting with coffee and the kind of legal documents that would determine her sister's future. Robert spread the papers across his desk like a battle plan. "The plea agreement is actually quite favorable," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Claire would serve 2 years of supervised probation, pay full restitution for the stolen money and sold items, perform 200 hours of community service, and attend mandatory therapy twice a week. In exchange, she pleads guilty to reduced charges and avoids prison time. And if we pursue full prosecution, given the evidence, the forged documents, the financial theft, the elder abuse, she'd likely be convicted on multiple felony counts. With no prior record, she might get the minimum sentence, but we're still talking about serious prison time." Michael spoke for the first time since Sarah had returned from the hospital. "What does your gut tell you?" Sarah thought about their conversation the night before, when she'd finally read their grandmother's letter. The pages had revealed an elderly woman who was far more aware of Claire's manipulation than anyone had realized, but who had also expressed a deep concern for Claire's obvious psychological distress. "Grandmother wrote that she was worried about Claire," Sarah said slowly. "Not just angry about the theft, but genuinely concerned about her mental health. She asked me to, quote, find a way to help her heal, not just punish her. Single quote, quote." Robert nodded. Rose was always wise about people. Even when she was documenting Claire's behavior for legal purposes, she kept asking me if there was a way to get Claire help instead of just stopping her. "But there's something else to consider," Sarah continued. "If we go with the plea agreement, Claire stays in the community. She'd be able to start rebuilding relationships, maybe eventually make genuine amends to people she's hurt. And if she violates the terms? Prison," Robert said simply. "The suspended sentence would be activated immediately." Sarah looked out the window toward Elm Street, where Mrs. Jameson was probably documenting the comings and goings at the house that would soon officially be hers. The weight of decision felt enormous, not just for Claire's future, but for her own ability to live with whatever choice she made. "There's one more thing," she said finally. "I've been thinking about what to do with the house." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You mean besides live in it?" "I can't live there. Not after everything that's happened. But I also can't just sell it and walk away. It represents too much family history, too many generations of memories." Sarah pulled out a folder she'd been carrying since her meeting with Dr. Martinez. "I want to establish a foundation. Turn the house into a community resource center focused on elder care and family crisis intervention." Robert's expression shifted from legal advisor to friend. "That's actually brilliant. It honors your grandmother's memory while addressing the kinds of problems that led to this situation. And it gives Claire a chance to do meaningful work as part of her community service," Sarah added. "If she's genuinely committed to changing, she could help other families navigate the kinds of issues that our family failed to handle." "What about the money?" Michael asked. "Running a foundation isn't cheap. Between the insurance money and what I can recover from the antique sales, there should be enough for an endowment. And I've been thinking about taking a sabbatical from Guatemala to get it established." Sarah felt something settle into place as she spoke. "Maybe it's time I came home for more than just funerals." Robert smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him since returning to Millbrook. "I think your grandmother would approve. She always said this town needed more ways for families to help each other instead of just judging each other." "So we offer Claire the plea agreement?" "We offer Claire a chance to earn redemption," Sarah corrected. "Whether she takes it and what she does with it, that's up to her." As they prepared the necessary paperwork, Sarah thought about the conversation she'd have with Claire when she woke up. Her sister would have to choose between easy answers, blame, resentment, victim narratives, and the hard work of genuine change. Either way, Sarah had made her choice. Justice tempered with mercy, consequences balanced with opportunity for growth. Whether it was enough to heal their fractured family remained to be seen, but for the first time since returning to Millbrook, Sarah felt like she was moving towards something hopeful, rather than just reacting to crisis. The broken figurines could be replaced. The stolen money could be repaid. The forged documents could be voided. Whether the trust between sisters could be rebuilt, that would take much longer to determine. The Millbrook County Courthouse had seen its share of family dramas over the years, but the Mitchell sisters' case had drawn an unusually large crowd. Sarah sat in the front row, watching Claire sign the plea agreement with hands that shook slightly from withdrawal from the anxiety medication she'd been taking. 3 weeks of intensive therapy had helped stabilize her, but the fragility was still visible in the careful way she held herself. Judge Patricia Kellerman reviewed the documents with the thorough attention of someone who understood that this case would set a precedent for how the community handled elder abuse and family fraud. Behind them, Sarah could hear whispered conversations, some supportive, others skeptical about whether justice was truly being served. "Mrs. Claire Mitchell," Judge Kellerman said, her voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench, "do you understand that by accepting this plea agreement, you are admitting guilt to charges of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person?" "Yes, Your Honor." Claire's voice was barely audible. "And do you understand that any violation of the terms of this agreement, failure to attend therapy, missed community service hours, or any further illegal activity will result in the immediate activation of a 3-year prison sentence?" "I understand." Sarah felt Michael's hand find hers as Judge Kellerman continued outlining the terms. Full restitution of $63,000 in stolen funds. Return of all remaining family heirlooms. 200 hours of community service, specifically focused on elder care advocacy. Twice weekly therapy sessions for a minimum of 2 years. And perhaps most significantly, a public acknowledgement of her crimes and their impact on the community. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge continued, "part of this agreement requires you to address this court and the community about your actions. Are you prepared to do that now?" Claire stood slowly, her hands gripping the defendant's table for support. When she turned to face the courtroom, Sarah saw her sister clearly for the first time in weeks. Not the manipulative schemer or the broken woman in psychiatric crisis, but someone trying to find her way back to being human. "Your Honor, members of the community." Claire's voice strengthened as she spoke. "What I did was wrong. I exploited my grandmother's trust. I stole from her. And I lied to everyone who tried to help me. I told myself I deserved the house because I was the granddaughter who stayed. But the truth is, I was trying to steal something that was never mine to take." Sarah watched faces in the courtroom. Mrs. Jameson nodding grimly, Betty Chen taking notes for the paper, Jessica sitting in the back row with tears in her eyes. "I hurt my family, I hurt the people who trusted me, and I dishonored my grandmother's memory," Claire continued. "I can't undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. That's what I intend to do." Judge Kellerman accepted the plea formally, then surprised everyone by addressing the courtroom directly. "This case has forced our community to confront some difficult questions about how we care for our elderly residents and how we support families in crisis. The Mitchell family has chosen a path of restorative rather than purely punitive justice, and I believe their decision offers lessons for all of us." After the hearing, Sarah found herself standing on the courthouse steps with Claire for the first time since the hospital. The October air had turned crisp, promising winter's approach, but the afternoon sun felt warm enough for hope. "I expected you to want me in prison," Claire said quietly. "Part of me did." Sarah's honesty felt like a gift they were both finally ready to exchange. "But grandmother's letter. She was more concerned about getting you help than getting revenge." "I read the letter." Claire's voice was steady now, no longer carrying the desperate edge of previous weeks. "Dr. Martinez had me read it as part of therapy. She knew, didn't she? About everything. She knew. And she documented it all to protect herself. But she also kept asking Robert if there was a way to help you instead of just stopping you." They walked slowly toward the street, where Michael was waiting by the car, giving the sisters space to navigate this fragile new dynamic. "Sarah," Claire said, stopping suddenly, "I need you to know. The things I said about you abandoning the family, about grandmother feeling forgotten, those were lies I told myself to justify what I was doing. Grandmother talked about you constantly. She was proud of your work, worried about your safety, excited about your projects. She never felt abandoned. The admission lifted a weight Sarah hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Thank you for telling me that. There's something else. Claire pulled a small velvet box from her pocket. The silver locket. I never sold it. I couldn't. It felt like the last connection to being part of this family. Sarah took the box, feeling the weight of 3 generations of women who had worn the necklace. Grandmother always said it would go to the eldest granddaughter. But maybe… Claire's voice was hesitant. Maybe it should go to the granddaughter who earned it. Sarah opened the box, looking at the delicate silver chain that had once seemed so important. Now it felt like a symbol of something different, not ownership or inheritance, but the possibility of repair. How about we share it? Sarah said. You wear it during your community service work, I'll wear it when I'm setting up the foundation. A reminder that we're both trying to honor what she wanted. Claire's eyes filled with tears. The first genuine emotion Sarah had seen from her that wasn't rooted in desperation or manipulation. You'd trust me with it? I'd trust you to earn that trust. As they walked toward Michael's car, Sarah felt the strange sensation of solid ground beneath her feet for the first time since returning to Millbrook. Not the ground of childhood memories or inherited obligations, but something new they were building together. What happens now? Claire asked. Now you start your community service at the Elder Care Center. I start working with Robert to establish the Rose Mitchell Foundation for Family Support. And we figure out how to be sisters again. And if I mess up, Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who was genuinely afraid of her own capacity for self-destruction, but also genuinely committed to change. Then you face the consequences. But Claire, I don't think you're going to mess up. I think you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself. As Michael drove them away from the courthouse, Sarah watched the town of Millbrook scroll past the windows. Tomorrow, the house on Elm Street would officially become the foundation headquarters. Next week, Claire would begin her work at the Elder Care Center, helping other families navigate the challenges that had destroyed theirs. And eventually, when the immediate crisis had settled into routine, Sarah would return to her humanitarian work, but with a new understanding of how healing happened, one relationship at a time. The road ahead wasn't certain, and trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, with evidence rather than promises. But for the first time since their grandmother's funeral, both sisters were moving in the same direction, towards something better than what they'd inherited, something worthy of the woman who had loved them both enough to document the truth and demand accountability, even from beyond the grave. 6 months later, the Victorian house on Elm Street bore little resemblance to the scene of family destruction Sarah had found upon her return to Millbrook. The wraparound porch now sported a warm blue paint job and a discreet bronze plaque reading, Rose Mitchell Foundation for Family Support. What had once been grandmother's formal living room was now a consultation space where families could meet with counselors, social workers, and legal advocates. The dining room housed a resource library focused on elder care, family crisis management, and conflict resolution. Sarah stood in the kitchen, now converted to a small conference room, reviewing final preparations for the Foundation's first annual community celebration. Through the window, she could see Michael directing the setup crew as they arranged tables and chairs across the back lawn. The same garden where Claire had once replanted roses without permission now bloomed with a memorial garden dedicated to grandmother's memory. The caterers just arrived, Jessica announced, appearing in the doorway with the clipboard that had become her constant companion since taking the job as the Foundation's program coordinator. And Channel 8 wants to interview you at 3 o'clock about the Elder Advocacy Program. Sarah marveled at the changes in Jessica over the past months. The hesitant paralegal who had been torn between friendship and professional ethics had emerged as a passionate advocate for family justice. Her legal background, combined with her first-hand experience of manipulation and betrayal, made her uniquely qualified to help other families navigate similar crises. "Any word from Claire?" Sarah asked. She texted from the nursing home. "The memorial presentation is running a bit long, but she'll be here by 2:30. Jessica paused, studying Sarah's expression. "You know, 6 months ago I would never have imagined asking this, but are you nervous about her speaking today?" Sarah considered the question. The relationship between the sisters remained complex, built on cautious trust, careful boundaries, and the shared commitment to honoring their grandmother's memory through meaningful work. Claire had exceeded every requirement of her plea agreement, completing her community service hours early and maintaining perfect attendance at therapy sessions. More importantly, she'd found genuine purpose in her work at the Elder Care Center, where her experience with manipulation had been transformed into an almost supernatural ability to spot signs of abuse or exploitation. "Not nervous exactly," Sarah said, "but this is the first time she'll be talking publicly about what happened, beyond the formal acknowledgement in court. That takes courage." Through the window, Sarah watched Mrs. Jameson directing traffic in her front yard, where neighbors were gathering before the official start time. The elderly woman had become an unofficial foundation board member, her decades of careful observation now channeled into training volunteers to recognize signs of elder abuse. Her documentation skills, once focused on neighborhood gossip, had been formalized into a community watch program that other towns were beginning to adopt. "Sarah?" Michael appeared in the doorway, his hair slightly disheveled from outdoor setup work. "Robert just arrived, and he wants to talk to you before things get started." She found Robert Thompson standing in what had been grandmother's study, now converted into the foundation's administrative office. The mahogany desk remained, but the locked filing cabinets had been replaced with open shelving, displaying resource guides and educational materials. Robert was examining a framed copy of grandmother's letter, the document that had ultimately saved both sisters, though in different ways. "I wanted to give you this before the ceremony," he said, handing her a thick envelope. "Your grandmother's insurance settlement finally came through. After the foundation's initial endowment and Claire's restitution payments, there's still a substantial amount left." Sarah opened the envelope, scanning the financial documents. Even after covering all the foundation's startup costs and Claire's obligations, the remaining sum was significant, enough to expand their services, perhaps even establish satellite programs in other communities. "There's something else," Robert continued. "I've been contacted by 3 other towns that want to replicate what you've built here. Apparently your model of combining elder advocacy, family mediation, and restorative justice is getting attention from social work programs across New England." The scope of impact was overwhelming. What had begun as a family crisis had evolved into something with the potential to help thousands of families avoid the destructive patterns that had nearly destroyed the Mitchell sisters. "We'll need to think carefully about expansion," Sarah said. "The personal element, the fact that we've lived through these issues ourselves, that's what makes this work authentic. Which is why I think Claire's involvement is so crucial," Robert replied. "Her story, her transformation, that's proof that people can change, that families can heal even after serious betrayal." At 2:45, Sarah stood on the front porch, looking out at a crowd that had grown beyond anything they'd anticipated. Town officials mingled with social workers from neighboring communities. Elderly residents sat beside family members who had attended the foundation's support groups. Local business owners who had donated funds stood next to college students researching family therapy models. Claire arrived exactly on time, walking up the familiar sidewalk with the measured pace of someone who had learned to be present in each moment rather than racing toward the next crisis. She wore a simple blue dress and grandmother's silver locket, her weak to carry it, and moved with a quiet confidence that was entirely different from the brittle bravado Sarah had encountered 6 months earlier. "How was the presentation at the nursing home?" Sarah asked as Claire joined her on the porch. "Emotional," Claire replied. "I was talking to a family about recognizing signs of financial exploitation, and the daughter started crying because she realized her brother had been stealing from their mother for months. But instead of calling the police immediately, she asked if they could get counseling first. That's when I knew we were making a real difference." The sisters stood together for a moment, looking out at the community that had rallied around their grandmother's memory and their family's commitment to transformation. It wasn't the homecoming either of them had imagined, but it was something more meaningful, a partnership built on shared purpose rather than inherited obligation. Michael stepped up to the makeshift podium, his voice carrying easily across the crowd. Welcome to the first annual Rose Mitchell Memorial Celebration. 6 months ago, this house was the site of a family crisis that could have destroyed relationships permanently. Today, it stands as proof that with commitment, accountability, and community support, families can rebuild trust and create something meaningful from even the most painful experiences. Sarah spoke first, outlining the Foundation's programs and impact. The numbers were impressive. 47 families served, 12 cases of suspected elder abuse investigated and resolved, 6 mediation sessions that had prevented legal action, and 3 families who had chosen restorative justice approaches similar to what the Mitchell sisters had navigated. But the statistics, while important, weren't what moved the crowd. It was the personal testimonials that followed. Families who had found ways to heal rather than simply assign blame. Elderly residents who felt safer because of the Community Watch program, and adult children who had learned to recognize the difference between caring for aging parents and controlling them. When Claire stepped to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. Many had followed the legal proceedings through local news coverage, but this was her first extended public statement about her actions and their aftermath. 6 months ago, I stood in that courthouse and admitted that I had committed fraud, forgery, and elder abuse against my own grandmother, she began, her voice steady but not devoid of emotion. Today, I want to talk about what I've learned since then, not just about the legal consequences of my actions, but about the psychological and emotional factors that led me to make such destructive choices. Claire spoke for 15 minutes, describing her therapy journey with brutal honesty. She talked about the insecurity that had driven her to seek validation through control. She explained how her resentment toward Sarah had poisoned her relationship with their grandmother, making her unable to appreciate the genuine love that was offered without conditions. Most importantly, she discussed the ongoing work of rebuilding trust, with Sarah, with the community, and with herself. Healing doesn't happen because you serve your community service hours or attend your therapy sessions, she said, looking directly at Sarah. Healing happens when you stop making excuses for harmful behavior and start taking responsibility for becoming the person your loved ones deserved all along. The applause that followed was sustained but respectful, recognition of courage rather than celebration of celebrity. When Claire stepped down from the podium, Sarah caught her hand briefly, a gesture that acknowledged how far they'd both traveled from that awful morning when Claire had demanded she pack her bags. As the formal program concluded and people began to mingle, Sarah found herself in conversation with Dr. Martinez, who had driven up from the hospital to attend the celebration. I have to admit, when I first evaluated Claire, I wasn't optimistic about her long-term prospects, he said. The combination of personality factors and family dynamics suggested a pattern that would be very difficult to break. What made the difference? Sarah asked. You, he replied simply. Your willingness to choose restoration over revenge gave her something to work toward, rather than just consequences to avoid. That's incredibly rare in cases involving financial fraud and elder abuse. It wasn't entirely altruistic, Sarah admitted. Part of me needed to believe that families could heal from this kind of betrayal. If Claire couldn't change, what did that say about the possibility of forgiveness in general? Which is exactly why this model is so powerful. Dr. Martinez continued. You've created a framework that addresses both individual accountability and systemic family dysfunction. That's revolutionary in the field of elder abuse prevention. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Sarah walked through the house, observing conversations and connections forming across the rooms that had once been filled with tension and deception. In the former living room, Mrs. Jameson was training a group of volunteers in documentation techniques. In the dining room, Jessica was explaining legal advocacy resources to a family dealing with suspected financial exploitation. Upstairs, Michael was leading a tour for visiting social workers who wanted to understand how physical space could be designed to promote healing rather than hierarchy. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't since Sarah's childhood, filled with purpose and community rather than secrets and resentment. It was, she realized, what grandmother had always wanted, a place where families could find support and guidance rather than judgment and isolation. As the last guest departed and the cleanup crew finished their work, Sarah found herself alone on the front porch with Claire and Michael. The October evening was crisp but not cold, and the sound of normal neighborhood life, dogs barking, children playing, dinner conversations drifting through open windows, provided a peaceful backdrop to their reflection. "So what's next?" Claire asked. "I know you're planning to return to Guatemala eventually." "Eventually," Sarah agreed. "But not yet. There's too much momentum here to walk away from, and I think the foundation needs a few more years of stability before it can operate without daily oversight." "And after that?" Sarah looked at the house that had been the center of so much family drama, now transformed into something that served the broader community. "After that, we'll see. Maybe international work that focuses on family systems rather than just infrastructure. Maybe expanding this model to other regions. Or maybe something we haven't thought of yet." Claire was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Would there be room in any of those plans for someone with a criminal record and a lot of apologizing still to do?" The question hung in the air between them. Not quite an invitation, not quite a plea, but an acknowledgement that their work together was just beginning. "Claire," Sarah said, choosing her words with the same care she'd once used in diplomatic negotiations, "I think there's room in any meaningful work for people who understand both the capacity for harm and the possibility of redemption." Michael smiled, recognizing the careful diplomacy that had characterized the sisters' relationship rebuilding. "In other words, yes, but let's take it one step at a time." "One step at a time," Sarah agreed. As they sat together on the porch where their confrontation had begun 6 months earlier, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd returned to Millbrook expecting to attend a funeral and handle simple estate matters. Instead, she'd discovered that healing was more complicated than building schools, that justice was more nuanced than legal proceedings, and that family could be both the source of deepest wounds and the foundation for meaningful repair. The house behind them stood as testament to the possibility of transformation, not just for individuals, but for the systems that either support or undermine human flourishing. It wasn't the inheritance any of them had expected, but it was the legacy their grandmother would have chosen. Proof that with enough courage, accountability, and community support, even the most broken families could build something beautiful from the wreckage of their mistakes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families in crisis, new opportunities to test whether the model they'd created could truly prevent others from experiencing the destructive patterns that had nearly destroyed the Mitchell sisters. But tonight, sitting on the porch of the house that had witnessed both betrayal and redemption, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the solid satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,